I'd like to welcome everybody to the I-29 Moo University in the Northern Plains Forage Association Forage Webinar Series. It continues this evening with a variety of forage topics, including overview of controlling weeds in hay, alfalfa breeding and cutting timing, and the monthly hay market outlook. This webinar series is an extension of the annual Forage Field Day sponsored each summer and rotated among Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, and South Dakota. This webinar will be archived on the I-29 Moo University website at i29moou.com/forages. You will be sent an email once the webinar is posted on the website. It will contain the link for this evening's archived program, the announcement and registration link for next month's webinar, and the link for the webinar evaluation. I encourage you to take 2 minutes to give us your thoughts on how useful this webinar was to you and how we can improve it. Plus, give us topics for the future. One of the keys to this series' success is multiple topics, fast pace, and plenty of time for questions. Please enter your questions in the chat box below your screen, and we will discuss them at the conclusion of the 3 presentations. We'll begin this evening's program with Dr. Wess Everman, who will be talking on controlling weeds in hay. Dr. Everman is the assistant professor and extension weed specialist. He came to Iowa State by way of North Carolina, where he spent 13 years as a professor and extension weed specialist. There he conducted research and extension activities, finding economical solutions to growing problem of herbicide resistance in weeds. He'll discuss getting a handle on weeds in hay, both identification and controlling them in hay and pasture fields. As I always say, Dr. Everman, the podium is yours.
All right. Thank you for that introduction. Happy to be here tonight. And uh, no, they definitely don't have any weed issues in North Carolina. I solved them all. That's why I came here. No. um, Want to thank everybody for inviting me. Hopefully, I can give you guys a quick overview of some things. I'm not going really heavy in the identification, just kind of talking around the management focus. And I'll have a little bit of identification sprinkled in. If you have questions, feel free to pop in and type it in the chat, or if you want to interrupt me, it won't throw me off. I'm happy to answer questions as I go along. So the main keys I want to focus on are how we're going to manage our weeds in our forages, right? A big piece of management, different than row crops, corn and beans, is our cultural control. Our cultural management is a keystone, the foundation for managing weeds, whether it's in a hay crop, in a pasture, across the board with our forages. We have to have good management of our forage to have good weed management. We can do some cleanup with chemicals, but the chemicals just, they're there to help us out. They're not going to solve our problems. So we want to make sure we set up our fields for success and manage everything that we do to keep those fields clean. Integrated weed management, we talk about a lot, mostly as a theoretical concept for our row crops, right? In our corn and soybean, it's something to achieve, but in our forages, it's something that's typically necessary. So integrated weed management, the everything comes from prevention, right? If we can prevent weeds from showing up, that's the best way to avoid issues. But then once we get weeds in our fields, we have to do a combination of control tactics. Cultural, chemical, mechanical are by far the most common. We can utilize some biological control. It's typically not as effective in our high management systems, but definitely an overlap of the cultural, mechanical, and chemical in our forage systems is key. First off, whether it's alfalfa or a pasture, we have to have good stand establishment. Make sure our seeding rate's right, seeding depth, get good seed soil contact, and timing of our planting. If we don't have a healthy stand, we don't have an appropriately established stand, we're going to be struggling to manage our weeds from the get-go. And that goes with fertility and pH as well. We need to make sure we get that squared away so that crop gets a good start and it's not lagging behind. A lagging crop opens the door for weeds to get established. Of course, with alfalfa, we got to pay attention to autotoxicity. And then for anything we're cutting or even grazing, we have to watch our harvest management, our feeding, our grazing schedules when we're cutting it so that we're not putting undue stress on that crop, cutting it too often, cutting it too short, or grazing it too short. If we get out of whack there, again, the crop's not going to be as healthy. It's not going to fill in the gaps. It's not going to shade out the weeds. And we introduce opportunity for weeds to show up. And the same for insects and diseases, right? A stressed crop is great for weeds to come in and challenge us because they're less competitive. So in general, things that are important to know, weeds that emerge with our crop are typically more problematic. So if we can maintain a 60-day weed-free period at the start, from our establishment, from coming out of dormancy, it will help reduce most of our yield losses. Later emerging weeds, usually they're only a worry from a standpoint of forage quality, not so much our yield impact. But we do know some of the weeds can be less nutritious, less digestible, and some can even be poisonous. Winter annual weeds tend to be especially competitive with our forages because they're coming in the winter, often when our grasses, our alfalfa are dormant, and then once we come out of dormancy, those weeds are already growing, they're already present, and so they can be some of the most competitive, challenging weeds for us to have as far as yield loss. And like I said, and this is going to be my broken record, kind of beating a dead horse, but the most effective weed control strategy in any forage is a dense, healthy stand. If we can maintain that, it'll go a long way towards having to implement other management options. So some of our common annual weeds in alfalfa and even in pastures, we don't tend to get a lot of annual weeds in the pastures, usually because there's not an opportunity for them to come up, but it does happen sometimes. Winter annuals going to be the henbit, purple dead nettle, common chickweed, and then some of our brome grass, whether it's downy brome or cheatgrass. And then summer annuals, going to be red root pigweed is going to be a fairly common one. We can find spiny amaranth or water hemp showing up in some of our fields. Common lamb's quarters is one we often see. Common ragweed tends to show up as well because so the lamb's quarters and the ragweed are early germinating broadleaves. So this is why we tend to see them in our forage systems because they tend to get up early, often when our forage crop is still dormant or just breaking dormancy. And so that early germination allows lamb's quarters and ragweed to kind of pop up and compete. And the same can be true for some of our annual grasses. So as far as managing these annual weeds, our key to long-term control is that dense stand and just preventing seed production and even germination. If we have a dense stand, there's not open spaces for light to hit the soil for germination. Even if they germinate, they're going to be small and have a hard time coming through the rest of that forage. So we want a nice dense stand to keep the annuals down. When do we treat them? How are we going to try to control them if they do come up? our best results are when they're in the seedling stages. We don't want to wait until they get big when they, put on a seed head. So anytime in the year of germination, prior to flowering and seed production, we're going to be most successful. We can control it with cuttings, and oftentimes that's what we end up doing, that first cutting or that first grazing. We'll get those annuals taken out in the seedling stage. Spring, summer applications are typically going to be ideal. What's interesting, we have the pigweeds, for example. Some of these are actually quite nutritious and are a pretty good forage in and of themselves. But, it's not something we typically want to promote. We also can have biennial weeds. So our mustard species, whether it's wild radish, wild mustard, there's several other mustards, yellow rocket, tansy mustard. There's probably a dozen different mustards that are out there. Bull thistle, musk thistle are also biennials. You can see the rosette there in the middle. That's musk thistle. Bull thistle will look similar, but it'll be hairy and not smooth. The musk thistle's really smooth. Um, they start in the rosette. So all of these start in the rosette stage the first year. Then they overwinter in the second year. They end up bolting and put on that flowering stalk. You can see on the right side there, that's a mustard species, I believe yellow rocket. So burdock is another one. Back home, I grew up in Northeast Iowa. We always called burdock cocklebur, sometimes burdock, but it's got the burrs on it that stick to your clothes, stick to livestock. They like getting in the hair of cattle, horses, in the manes. And in wild carrot, we see that a lot in pastures, alfalfa fields, and ditches. So these biennials, they're 2-year plants. So the key to preventing them from becoming a bigger issue is preventing seed production. Keep them from going to seed so they don't set seed. They can be difficult for us because they'll grow that rosette stage 1 year and compete with us, and then will bolt and compete in the second year as well. So our best results are treating the seedling in that first year when they're a rosette, in that first year of germination, and it can be in the second year up until that bolting stage. Once they bolt, mowing is the best option. We're not going to get as good a control with chemicals, so we don't want to spray a bolting biennial. We want to just go ahead and mow them off. And I don't know how many of you guys ever did this. One of my first experiences with weeds and managing weeds was when I think it was in middle school, maybe early high school. Guy raised Herefords back home in Northeast Iowa. He had a lot of pasture ground, and he hired me a few weekends to go out with a spade that was sharpened on the edge and cut out bull thistle. And so I'd walk pastures all day and cut those out just below the soil surface. If you ever have done it, you just want to get underneath that plant. You don't need to dig it up, but if you just chop it or cut it right below the soil surface, you've taken it out. It's not going to send up new leaves. You took out that growing point, and it can be very effective. Now, this works for like bull thistle, musk thistle, the mustards, but it won't work for Canada thistle, a perennial. We'll talk about that in a bit. So here's our perennials. I think most people know what Canada thistle looks like, and dandelion. We got curly dock in the middle there. It has a big root as a storage organ for energy. Quackgrass is a perennial grass that we have, and then bindweed down here in the bottom right. I have a pile of it in my flower bed at my house. It is a tough one, and it can climb up the plants. So year round, it can be a challenge because of that climbing nature. You don't shade it out, it grows up to the sun. So really with all these perennials, we've got to prevent them from getting established. If we have an established patch of perennial weeds, we want to keep them from spreading because once they spread, it's really hard to shrink that back down. Once they get established, it can be very difficult in our perennial cropping systems, right? Our hay and pasture systems. Usually we want to try to treat these when they're seedling or early growth stages in the fall. during that vegetative growth. So what it does is it sends that chemical down to the storage organs and we get a little bit better kill. We can also mow to prevent seed production. So once they send up a seed head, if we mow them before they set seed, we can do a good job of keeping them from spreading by seed. Because a lot of these will either spread by their roots, rhizomes, or stolons, or seed. And we don't want them spreading by seed. Like I said, fall applications are ideal. All these plants will still actively be growing even now as a lot of stuff is, drying down, going dormant. Usually we still have our perennials actively growing so we can spray to actively kill the crown and roots. Also, typically in between, like right now before we're harvesting in a typical year, we're less hectic so we have time to get around and take care of it. I will say real quick, glyphosate works, but remember that it's going to kill whatever you spray. So make sure you're targeting, the rosette, the center of the plant on these perennials. Don't just spray willy-nilly everywhere. You don't have to hit everything to get good control. We can get good translocation typically. Replant, managing our weeds, perennial weeds, we need to take care of the fall before we plant. We can't count on killing them in the establishment year. Usually with conventional tillage, we can work that seed bed and knock them back. In no-till, we'll have to use a fall burn down. Glyphosate with 2,4-D works really well. You can use glyphosate alone, but the combination is usually pretty effective. Don't apply 2,4-D in the spring of the year. If you have annuals, you can use those products, glyphosate 2,4-D, or we can use bromoxone as well. Now, if we're getting established, like with alfalfa, we've got a couple of products we can pre-plant, incorporate that do well on broadleaves and grasses, Eptam or Treflan. A lot of folks don't like incorporating anymore, but they are an option. Post-emergence, we're going to typically have a few different products we use pretty regularly, right? We have our grass products, Post Plus, Select Max for grasses. Now, if you have a mixed alfalfa grass stand, you don't want to do this, or you'll just have an alfalfa or a clover stand. Annual broadleaves, we can use 2,4-DB, which is going to be typically Butarax, the one I see, but there are others. Buctril or Moxie work pretty well. It's not going to get all our species. If we have some winter annuals like chickweed and volunteer cereals, Curb will do a good job as well. Couple other products pretty commonly used, Pursuit and Raptor, are good ALS inhibitors, take out foxtail and a number of broadleaves, but we do have ALS resistance in water hemp, redroot pigweed, and ragweed in the state. So just be aware that there is some resistance to those herbicides. Now, uh, um, in an established stand, something that we've had for a year or more, we can use products like Sencor, Simbar, Velpar. We can use those while it's still dormant or even in between cuttings. If you have dandelion, the Sencor or Velpar would be your key products to use. And we can use again, the Pursuit or Raptor on a broad range of broadleaves and grasses, even quackgrass, to take them out of an established stand. There's a product there listed, Chateau. You're probably more familiar with it if you grow row crops under the name Valor. It's a PPO inhibitor. It does a good job. It'll kill some emerged weeds. They got to be fairly small, but it'll give a nice residual level of control into the season as well. And then Curb will also pick up quackgrass. So if we want to take quackgrass out, we've got 4 different options for us. Now, sometimes we get some of these weeds like Horiolysium, some other annual broadleaf weeds. Again, we can use the 2,4-DB to clean them up, take them out. They'll do a good job. You can see some lingering effects, on the alfalfa, or if you have clover in there, it'll slow it down a little bit, but in general, recover pretty quickly. and take out those broadleaf weeds. And then again, on an established stand, we can use Prowl H2O. This is residual activity only, so we would apply this uh, while it's still dormant or in between cuttings. It'll give us residual activity on our annual grasses and small seeded broadleaves, keep them from coming up. And this would be something we would do, especially where we know we maybe have a thin stand. We're trying to prolong the life of a stand that maybe wasn't established as well as we would like, and keep those annual weeds from coming in and competing with our forage. Give it a chance to get established and kind of take off. So the best time to target our weeds is during the establishment year, right? We want to knock out our weeds before they compete with our crop. So we have a number of different herbicides that work well in the establishment year while we're getting going. We want to get our winter annuals and perennials in the established stands in the spring. Again, before the alfalfa breaks dormancy, we can spray Sencor, Simbar, Curb, or Velpar. So in an established stand, on a dormant stand, we can spray these products, take out our winter annuals and perennials before that alfalfa even takes off. And then grass weeds are easy to clean up in our broadleaf crops. We got a number of different options we can go to with that. Long-term management, it goes back to what I said, right? Having a vigorous stand of growth, whether you're alfalfa, whether you're in a pasture, you want the best stand you can have. So put your work into and your energy into establishing your forage and keeping it healthy through fertility and pH management, managing other pests. That will help keep weeds from coming in. Just kind of monitor it then for invasions when things start to show up so you can be timely in taking them out and keeping them in a small area so that they don't expand further in the field. So when we look at our management pyramid, let's call it in forages, that foundation is going to be cultural management. Then we'll add mechanical control to it. And the little bit, the icing on the top, will be chemical control. We shouldn't be focused on chemical weed management in our forages. That should be our last resort, so to speak. Again, this is kind of flipped on its head from what we would typically do in our corn and soybean systems, right? We're very heavy on the chemical. That's going to typically be our foundation. And then we'll use cultural and possibly mechanical control where we need to. So here are some of the examples of what we can do or what we should be using, right? A dense stand with proper fertility, using preventative measures to keep weeds from coming in, mowing or controlling them before they set seed, controlled grazing and mowing so that we're not over overgrazing or overcutting, keeping that stand healthy, but also we can time our cutting and our grazing to take out our weeds before they set seed. And then, the smallest piece of this should be the herbicides. It will be all about management. Management is the key focus. So that's what I have. I had planned to leave a little time for questions. If we're going to save them for later, I guess that just gets us on the track towards everybody else a little sooner. I can answer questions now or stick around and answer them later, however works best.
If we have folks with a burning question, go ahead and unmute and ask a question. We've got a couple of minutes here, so now's the time to start them up. I've got
And
one.
Sure, go ahead.
Got one question that came in. What do we change in a drought year? How do we handle this, or do we change it up?
Yeah, so as far as managing our weeds in a forage in a drought year, I would say, we've got to watch. I would say control weeds earlier in a droughty year, right? Because we don't want to put any more stress on our forage than we have to. So that might be where we switch to a little bit more of a chemical approach. to try to just take them out. And maybe we're going to spot spray a little bit and clean them up because a lot of the weeds have fairly aggressive root growth. And I know, a lot of our forages have deep roots, but if we allow those weeds to go down and find the water as well, we're looking at a more competitive weed in the future also. So I guess I would say don't don't assume that the weeds are going to be struggling too, and it's not going to be a big deal. I think I would still stay fairly aggressive so that then when we do get moisture, when the crop and weeds are starting to grow again, we're not competing for the resources as badly, if that makes sense.
Yep, sure does. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions come in on the chat. If you want to go ahead and stop your sharing, Dr. Everman, thank you for the program. And
Yeah.
I'll ask Jeff, there he goes, he's a step ahead of me. Our next presenter is Jeff Jackson, Alfalfa Forage Specialist at CROPLAN by WinField. Uh, he will discuss alfalfa disease, breeding advancements, alfalfa cutting and timing, and reading the stand concerning fall health assessment on when to rotate. Jeff, the podium's yours.
Thanks everybody for joining tonight, and I will warn you, I probably have more prepared than we have time for, so you know how this goes, and I like to tell stories and get engaged, and so there's going to be a couple slides you're going to get bumped pretty quick because maybe you get a good look at it and we move on, and if you have questions later or want to get a hold of me, you certainly can. So thanks again, and I want to invite anybody if I try to do a bunch of social media stuff out in the country as well and talk about forage agronomics and raising high quality forages. So if you want to follow me anywhere, I go by @ForageFanatic out there. So that's available as we go forward. All right. So just a quick intro slide here to talk about a couple things. So in this whole agronomy world, just like anything else out there that we deal with, things change. So we must adapt to overcome some of that. We have these insect pests that are evolving all the time. Weeds, diseases are continually moving target. And we just got done talking about weed programs and herbicide tolerances happen with different weeds. Alfalfa weevil, tolerance to pesticides. That's something that we won't discuss today, but something that could be a topic that you care about. Disease races and strains will shift. So much like as we all just went through this era of COVID, when they talk about COVID having different races and shifting and evolving, some of our soil diseases that affect alfalfa do the same thing. So new races are formed, they evolve and change out there. And I want to talk a little bit about that first of all this today. And one of those is anthracnose. So anthracnose is one of those diseases, again, it's going to favor some of these moisture conditions, some hotter weather. If you look at the center picture here with the little plant with the shepherd's crook look. So basically what we have is a disease that will get splashed up on that stem. And if you look at the picture to the left, it has a picture of what they call a diamond-shaped lesion on the stem of that plant. And over time, it girdles that stem. And once it girdles the stem, then you get the shepherd's crook look. That stem is basically getting cut off from carbohydrate flow. The xylem and phloem are messed up. Now we have a dead stem. I'm probably guilty. One, I've been a forage agronomist for almost 20 years now. Lived in Brookings, South Dakota for 27 years. Did a bunch of Northwest Iowa work. And people would call me and say, "Hey, Jeff, I've got some dead plants in my field." And I would say, "Well, are they dead plants or do you have a stem here and there that's just turned brown?" And they'd say, "Yeah, just a stem. How bad?" "Well, not too bad." And we just kind of give them that comment, "Well, there's nothing we can do to change it today. Go on with life, cut that crop." It has to have plant resistance. So what I want to let you know today too, that there are new varieties. There's been a bunch of breeding work that's done that we have varieties today. Most of the varieties in the industry today are resistant to races 1, race 2, race 3, and race 4 of anthracnose. And now we have a new 5th race of anthracnose coming across the US. And we do have varieties today that are tolerant to race 5. So the good thing is things changed. The breeding is kind of keeping up with it. We've got that identified. We have new varieties out there we can handle. Anthracnose, probably one of the least that we notice, but we really haven't measured the impact of it. It might be taking more yield off than we think, so I figured I'd talk about it today, be aware of it. There are new varieties in the industry today that can handle that disease pressure, so we can move on with that. Depending on how good your screen is today, you can see that where we have anthracnose race 5 resistance, we have a much cleaner alfalfa stand, less plant damage, less necrosis. Inherently, that's going to give us a yield advantage. So varieties today can handle that tolerance. The one that's probably more devastating to most of you on this call today would be Aphanomyces root rot. One thing about Aphanomyces root rot, that disease specifically, we generally find in poorly drained soils, soils that have a tendency to hold moisture a little bit better and give us that vector or that environment as well that will make that disease more aggressive to those plants. So found in poorly drained soils primarily. It's generally more detrimental in the seedling year when we do spring seeded stands because we generally have more moisture in the spring. The heat starts to come on as those little plants are trying to establish, and this disease is technically a root nibbler. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, I put in there that it's a root nibbler. You're going to see some stunted plants. As an agronomist in this industry, there are multiple times I'm sure that we misdiagnosed this problem because we would get calls and you can see the pictures of these little seedlings coming out of the ground with the bronze colored cotyledons. We might tell somebody, hey, you know what? Looks to me like there's a fertility deficiency. Maybe you have a herbicide carryover issue, something like that that's affecting that plant. Well, I mentioned fertility deficiency. If we have a root nibbler out there and we have a new young plant that's trying to grow, establish its root system and find its place in the world, but we also have a disease out there taking the roots off, we might have a predisposed nutrient deficiency. So were we wrong? Not necessarily, but we did not know the root cause, and the root cause was probably a root nibbler, Aphanomyces. I first encountered Aphanomyces race 2 in Pipestone, Minnesota, probably 15 years ago, where I was walking through an alfalfa stand and there was a distinct line in the field where the crop was 6 or 8 inches taller. And I stopped the grower and I said, hey, wait, something weird going on here. Did you used to have 2 fields in this area? Fence line here, farm it differently, 2 crops, what was going on? He goes, no. Been farming this for my entire life, never done anything different, always been one field. And after a few minutes of kicking around, he remembered. He's like, oh, this is where I ran out of seed drilling the field, and I had to go back to my retailer and grab a few more bags. The only difference at that time frame, 15 years ago, was the difference in Aphanomyces race 2 disease tolerance. And it was just a fantastic example of what plant breeding does to help give us benefit in those fields. So now today we know we have race 1, race 2's been around for quite a while, and now we have another. They're telling us they want to call it an evolving, more aggressive race 2. So they don't want us to call it race 3, but we're going to call it an emerging multi-race strain. So now we have this really aggressive one. So it's evolved. And we do have varieties, again, in the industry today that can handle some of that pressure. So when we have root nibblers out there, it's going to affect that root system. It's going to have poor nodulation, poor root mass, poor yield. And I think we have dealt with this without identifying it for a long time, because I know I have growers call me once in a while and say, hey, we're trying to keep up with the trends. We're trying to get the newest, latest, greatest varieties out there, but we just feel like we're not getting much yield advantage. So if that grower continually purchases a variety that might be a newer variety, but it does not have a disease tolerance package to overcome what's in your environment, you're probably not going to see that yield advantage, because we still have a disease that's a limiting factor in not letting that plant express its yield potential. So poor nodulation, again, poor root mass, poor plants out there. So this is one of these fun examples where I love to walk people through this, where I say, okay, we're out scouting fields and we go to this field on the right and we look at it and we go, yeah, dang it, Fred, looks like we did a pretty good job today. Everything's coming up. Maybe we got a little bit too deep, or maybe there's a little water sitting there. I don't know, but all the plants are coming and you feel pretty good. And then you walk to the next field and you go, holy smokes, it looks like we hit a home run here. That was fantastic. So Wesley's field looks a little bit better than Fred's field. And there's that meme out there where it always says, hey, you always think you're the coolest guy in the yard, and then this guy shows up? Yeah. What we have in this picture, folks, is varieties with different levels of tolerances to Aphanomyces and the races that are out there. So the variety on the right, where my cursor is at right now, would represent tolerance to the old race 1. The variety clear to the left would be tolerance to races 1 and race 2. The variety in the center would be tolerant to race 1, race 2, and this new aggressive emerging race that we have to deal with today. And I will tell you that coming from the east, west, I would be completely thinking about variety selection based on disease tolerances today, because of the disease pressure that we have. And I make this joke that you go all the way west to like Highway 25 in South Dakota, and once you hit Highway 25, the world changes. So for anybody on the call, you're probably in those zones, except maybe Sarah. I think she's on here today. She falls outside of that zone, but I got caught. I talked about Highway 25, and I was at a research location one day, and the research director said, Jeff, you need to be paying attention to these varieties, even in Garden City, Kansas. So I think we've done such a good job of finding varieties that can handle these diseases. We inadvertently done some more stress screening, and now we have these really, really stress tolerant varieties out there that can handle all kinds of stress. Now, when you think about this, if we can have a healthier root system, bigger root mass, more fibrous root system, we should be able to pick up more moisture, maybe better drought tolerance. We should be able to pick up nutrients better, maybe more efficient on nutrient application, bigger yields. All of these kind of things tie in. If you're playing some of these other games and you're measuring carbon, more root mass, more fibrous roots, more carbon storage, deeper carbon storage, all of these things will tie in. So great advancements in disease tolerance in the industry today. And to the point where you don't need a map to pick them out in some of these plots that we go look at throughout the year to do screenings. They're very, very obvious. So my point to these next pictures are, not all varieties are created equal. You need to ask some questions, go do your diligence, find out what's going on. Okay, now I put a couple of varieties in here so we could do a little example. You just got done hearing me talk about Aphanomyces and anthracnose. So as you go do seed selections, you might come to your seed retailer and say, hey, this smart mouth guy named Jeff was talking about anthracnose and Aphanomyces. What do you guys have? And they'll say, yep, nope, no problem. We got that in our varieties. See here, it says anthracnose and Aphanomyces right here. Well, if you compare these two varieties, both from the same company, I wanted to make it not picking on anybody, But if you look at both of those varieties, you have one that says Aphanomyces race 1 and Anthracnose race 1, HR for high resistance. When you look at the other product, it has Aphanomyces race 1, race 2. I have this thing with a 3 in there. We're going to call that the aggressive multi-race. Anthracnose race 1 and Anthracnose multi-race, which covers all 5. They are not created equal. So let's be clear. You can have those kind of issues out there, and if you were to plant them side by side on a soil that has that issue, you can get this effect side by side comparison in your soils. The variety to the right will come up. It'll probably grow. You might be disappointed in the performance and the yield and not know that it was just a soil disease, and it's all about variety selection. So those are some of the cool little advancements going on in the industry today. Just want you to know, if it has an HR for high resistance, which we showed right here, HR, a lot of different columns in there. Here's a couple R's over here. This is an alfalfa industry standard chart. To be considered highly resistant, only 51% of those plants or seeds in that bag need to germinate and grow and be a live plant to consider it be highly resistant. So that's a little bit scary. Some of these newer varieties today are getting a little bit bigger, better than that, closer towards 85%. Anyway, comment here, they're not all created equal, right? Differences all across the board. So I talked really fast. I threw a bunch of stuff out there. I'm going to try to watch a little bit, see if there's anything else in the chat box. Not yet. So folks, it's all about the roots. The roots are going to drive plant health. The roots are going to drive nutrient uptake, water stress, drought tolerance, nodulation to feed nitrogen to that plant. And then we get into persistence. We need to be able to build plant biomass to collect sunlight. We need to take that sunlight and convert it to carbohydrates in the root to store for regrowth. That gives us really good spring green up, and it gives us great regrowth between cuttings. And now we're going to transition into a little bit more of a root story. And here we are. It's September 17th, 2025 already. What do we do for this alfalfa plant? Well, first of all, we're going to monitor and watch our cutting timing so we get the appropriate regrowth or no regrowth. We're going to go out there and read that stand, and I put a note down here that we're not going to get to. We're going to touch on it real quick right now. Monitor the fall armyworm infestations. What makes me nervous is we might have some fall seeded alfalfa. We have seedlings coming up trying to find their way in the world. And literally, folks, if fall armyworms graze across your alfalfa field before it probably gets 30 days old, 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches tall, it's not a perennial plant yet. And if they mow across that thing and take small plants and cotyledons off, those are going to be bare patches. So be diligent to watch those infestations. So let's move on to some cutting timing discussions. This is a slide that I borrowed so graciously from Dr. Dan Undersander, University of Wisconsin, that talks a little bit about plant stages of maturity, quality, and yield. We all know this story that right after we cut that alfalfa plant and it starts to regrow, we have a bunch of vegetative material. It's low in fiber at this point, so it's very high quality. Over time, that quality is going to go down as that stand gets older or that cutting matures. As the yield goes up, quality is going to come down. We always talk about that crux where we like to cut, where they intersect out here in that bud stage. But also, when you follow this, as that plant starts to regrow, the root reserves of carbohydrate take a little dip, and then they start to recover over time. So I want to talk about that because that's very important. This is another old photo. I kind of want to retweak this a little bit and spread it out just a touch, but it makes very good sense. What this dark color represents in these crowns is carbohydrate storage. So what you're seeing in the first picture is that hopefully when we cut that plant, we have a full gas tank. So think of that root, that crown, that taproot as a gas tank. And after we cut it, right when we cut it, that's as full as it's going to get, because that next 6 to 8 inches of regrowth, week 1, week 2, we are going to suck carbohydrates out of that root to get new growth to start coming back. And at about, I'm going to call it 8 inches, I'm going to call that net zero, where we stop taking the carbohydrates out and we've got enough photosynthesis going on with the leaves up top that now we're gonna be net zero. And from 8 inches till we cut it, we're gonna trickle charge the battery, if you will, or we're gonna, slowly put some gas back in the tank. So over time, it's gonna dip, and then we're gonna recharge that root system over time. Now I want to make reference before we move on that Dr. Shelby Gruss of the Iowa State University Extension team has a quote in an article that was in Hay and Forage Grower E-Weekly magazine today that's stay out of the no-cut zone. So some of this information will be in that article if anybody wants to go to Hay and Forage Grower and find that as well, and give a little shout out to Shelby today. So we're in the fall. When should we cut our alfalfa? The Jeff Jackson rule is this. I mean, if you're in Iowa or surrounding areas, I usually tell people, and this is a South Dakota date, but I always told everybody coming from that area, you need to get your alfalfa either planted or cut by the time the state fair is over or Labor Day comes. So that would have been a couple weeks ago. So cutting alfalfa or planting alfalfa to make sure that you get 45 to 60 days of growth before it freezes is kind of a key to make sure you have a perennial plant on new seedings and you get carbohydrate storage and root reserves for a cut stand that's got some age on it. So let's run through this example. Let's say we're out at September 1st. We cut that alfalfa crop off. We had a full root reserve. And we get out here, boom, boom, boom. The root reserve goes down as the top growth starts to grow. We start getting shorter days, cooler temperatures, so that slows the curve out and it doesn't grow like it did earlier in the year really rapidly. And we get out to about October 15th. I looked at your extended forecast, and parts of Iowa will get in the lower 30s about the 16th or 17th of October. Maybe not a hard freeze, but the point is, once you have that hard freeze, now you have no more activity of your solar panels on top. Okay? So we want the tank to be full when we go into winter, so that when it breaks dormancy in the spring, boom, we are ready, full bore going, and we can have a very healthy crown to overwinter and get started for the next season. So here we are, the 15th of September. Happens every year. Guys get done cutting some silage because we talked earlier, the corn dried fast in Iowa. Silage got chopped quickly. They're going to look at that hay this week and go, "Oh, Fred, can we take a cutting alfalfa? I know it might, well, here's why we don't want to do that. If we cut that alfalfa plant on September 17th and the tank is full, and we let it grow for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we're starting to slow that growth curve, and it's out there towards the 15th of October, and we haven't gotten a lot of carbohydrate stored yet because it's getting short days, long nights, cool, we're not getting the heat units, you could be at a deficit in your crown or your carbohydrate root storage about the 15th of October, and then the photo periods, your photo, gosh, man, I just lost my train of thought. Your solar panels get hailed on, if you will. They're done. Leaves are no more photosynthesis. That's the word I'm looking for. So we don't want to cut alfalfa right now. That's the magic message, is that we're kind of at that point where we don't want to cut right now. Generally talk about staying out of alfalfa in the month of September. So I hope this whole carbohydrate storage and root reserve comment made sense for all of you. I'm going to back up again too, and we're just going to look at this slide and talk about cutting alfalfa in October. So if we have an October 15th freeze, within give or take 5, 10, maybe up to 14 days before that hard frost, you can cut your alfalfa and really not lose much carbohydrate storage because it's going to be cool. Days are going to be short. Maybe it only grows an inch or two, three. You have not used a lot of carbohydrate storage. So if you get out here to the middle of October, maybe it's close to November 1st before it actually freezes. I know where I'm at, it's going to be, we've had it be the 25th of November before it gets cold enough to freeze. But if you time it around that frost and you accumulate less than 360 growing degree units from the time you cut it to the time it freezes hard, you're not going to burn off enough carbohydrates to hurt the plant. And that's data from Canada. So pretty solid stuff. So you can cut after October 15th, November 1st, whatever it is. The detriment is going to be you're going to lose that biomass to catch snow. The insulative cover is gone. So make sure you need that forage. Depending on your bale type, the income might be hard to turn down. Maybe you're going to rotate that stand anyway, and you're like, if I ding it, so what? It's got 5 years on it. We're ready to rotate anyway. Let's just let it rip. The other thing about that carbohydrate storage I want to throw in here is this harvest schedule. And this study was put together for Harvextra alfalfa, where we talk about having a flexible cutting schedule because we can maintain quality longer. These two plots were managed so that they could be cut on the same day on a 28-day schedule or a 38-day schedule. And I want you to notice the regrowth difference a couple of days after it was cut on a 3 cutting scenario versus a 4 cutting scenario. How much carbohydrate was stored in 38 days versus 28 days? Now I know this isn't going to work for everybody. Example, completely example, pie in the sky. But you can use some of these tools to help manage that cutting interval so you're not cutting on 22, 24, 26 days. You can cut on 30, 32, 34 days and have better regrowth, better stand persistence, better plant health. It's all about carbohydrates. So lots to unpack there. Again, this is one of those yield versus quality trade-offs with Harvextra, where if you take that Harvextra quality curve and you can push it out a few more days, you're going to be at the same quality the other varieties might have been at a 28-day cutting, and you're out here at 34 or 35 days. So there's a benefit there to utilize that technology for the harvest flexibility to maintain quality. So a little tool in the toolbox in the alfalfa business today. All right, I'm going to buzz through this quick. How are you scouting your fields? Folks, we cannot scout fields 55 miles an hour in a white Chevy pickup. We've got to get out of the truck, get in the field, get your boots on the ground and see what's going on. We want you to go do a fall alfalfa crown assessment. This is what we call reading the stand. So you're going to go out there and dig, and we've got these beautiful rings. Take a square foot, dig them up, split the crowns open, and see how healthy that crown is. Because if you have a healthy crown, you can fill the fuel tank. If you don't have a healthy crown, you're going to limit how much carbohydrate you can store in that plant. So my example would be this crown right in the middle. You can see this is actually a spring picture, so bear with me, but it has some very, very good bud activity and through a bunch of stems for the first cutting. But when you consider all this brown, chocolate brown material in here is crown rot, and that crown rot will limit how much carbohydrate can be stored in that plant for second cut, third cut, and overwintering as time goes on. So we do a stand evaluation, we score those crowns. There's a very well-published scale, and it looks just like this. The first one is basically 0 damage. The second picture in the middle is, we call that a 1. You have maybe it's 1, 2, and 3. This third one over here with the little bit of brown with some crown rot starting is a 3. 4, 5, 6, or 0, 1, 2, 3. You know how this is going to go. I think I got my numbers mixed up. Moral of the story is, in the spring, even this plant with very, very poor crown health could throw some stems and look like it's okay. This guy's dead. It just doesn't know it yet. And it cannot hold the energy for good production for the next multiple cuttings that you plan to take. So I wanted to show this picture too. In the spring, as things green up, these two plants were dug up side by side. I have an 8-inch plant and something that's barely getting kick started. And when I split those crowns, I have a beautiful white, perfectly healthy crown to the left and a winter kill crown to the right. Now, again, folks, driving by at 50 miles an hour, you would assume that this stand's going to be okay because everything's green. Maybe not the case. So read the stand, get yourself out there, think about your cutting timing on these alfalfa products. If you need to take a late cutting, you can. We're going to zip through some interesting pictures of plant health examples. We've got some crown rot here in this left picture, but even in that photo, the third crown looks fantastic. This guy over here to the right, winter kill. This calf crap yellow thing, it's a new Crayola crayon color, by the way, just for the alfalfa guys. Calf crap yellow, that's a typical winter kill. This was suffocated by ice. Okay, ice damage. It's all about the stems at that point in the spring. Stem count, yield potential information. Make sure you're rotating your stands and utilizing nitrogen credits. We don't have to let them get 6, 7, 8, 10 years old where you got to jump from plant to plant to call it an alfalfa field. Take advantage of nitrogen credits for these corn crops and you'll have much more success. Field rotations, I was prepared to talk about some of that. Get your Forage 360 in there. Rotate with some other crops. Get your boots on the ground. Go find some things out. Okay. I made sure I saved 30 minutes for the next guy. Next person, excuse me. Any questions from the group? I couldn't have covered it all that well.
We do have a question, but it's identified for Dr. Everman.
There you go.
So at this point, I'd say, thank you, Jeff. Stay with us. I'm sure we're going to get questions at the end of the program.
Absolutely.
If you want to go ahead and drop your deck off, I will introduce our owner and operator, who will be Luke Schubert. He's the owner and operator with Schubert Auction Service in Playo's, Minnesota. And he's going to share his insights on the hay market he sees along the I-29 corridor. Luke?
Well, thank you, Fred. Well, I just, in my part of the world, which would be central Minnesota, I also cover a lot of northern Minnesota and some of western, we had our second consecutive year of very large hay crops, and especially low quality forages. It has got to be the low quality forage. If it isn't dairy quality or horse quality, it is almost hard to find somebody to buy it, to tell you the truth. It's gotten kind of rough. Good hay, you know, if you got 150 feed value hay plus alfalfa, there's all kinds of buyers for that. That's just harder and harder to come by, and anybody that finds it kind of gobbles it up pretty quick. From what I understand, most of the Midwest is in a similar situation. When I look at the hay prices around the area, there isn't a ton of opportunity to move hay to make money, to send it to different parts of the world. You don't see any FSA programs paying people to haul hay, anything like that. So it tells me it's pretty well widespread that there's a lot of forage out there. And with most of the commodity markets, with the exception of the cattle, it's probably a little bit of a depressed market scenario that we have right now. With that, I think there is a lot of opportunity for people that are looking to take advantage of the market, maybe stockpile some hay, do things like that, looking forward to the next few years in case we would have a drought, something of that situation. I'm trying to think of what else there is in the hay market, I guess, that I need to really cover, but for the most part, that's kind of been the story of the year so far. We're also just getting into really selling much of the hay that's been made this year.
What kind of quality are you seeing coming in from out of our area? I mean, we see a lot of Montana and Idaho hay over the period of a year. What are you seeing from out there?
From out there, I've got a few contacts in Montana. They struggle to get the quality hay up as well with a rainier season. I know on one guy that I know well sends a lot of hay to Florida from Montana, horse quality alfalfa, and his whole first cutting was not able to do anything with because just like around my place, it was hard to get anything made without it getting rained on or putting it up just a little bit too wet with excess humidity in the air. So I think there's probably going to be a little less coming out of that area. I don't know that area real well, though, as far as what's all going to come from out west.
I was speaking with a dairy producer who also has a fairly substantial hay production unit, and he was really excited about some of the grass that he had rolled up and was sending east. Are you seeing some really good grass coming in?
Yeah, we have seen a lot of good grass, especially that was made within the last month. We've got a lot of third cutting grass through central Minnesota here that is got the best quality I've seen probably in a few years. That makes up for the low quality stuff we had first cutting when everybody got it rained on, and I guess just struggled to get it put up the way they wanted to.
But you got a question, like, so back in the day, somebody mentioned Under Sanders' name. So I kind of grew up in extension working with him. And so when you take a look at some of these markets, there was always kind of a thumb rule about, like $1 a point for relative feed value, after some kind of a base price. And the second thing was kind of like some of your best hay prices, especially if you're a seller, tend to happen in that week before New Year's, the week after, whatever, as people kind of looking at whether it be taxes about buying hay and things like that, depending on what tax year they want. Do any of those things still stick, or any of the thumb rules that you have for pricing hay on the market?
Yeah, I would say that right around the first of the year is a great time to sell hay. Always has been, and I think that always will be. Like you said, there's people that are looking to use money, and hay is a good investment for a lot of people. As far as the like a buck a point deal, I'd say that is fairly common still. If you get over that 150, 60 feed value type hay, that's kind of when the dairy guys start wanting it more. If you're under that kind of feed value, it might be 50 cents a point really fast. So it's there's a big stretch there on high quality forage and average or low quality forage. If you get 180 feed value hay, though, that could bring 160 a ton. It could bring 250, depending on who's there. As you get higher and higher quality, you get more horse people want it. You can send it farther, things like that. So once again, quality really is everything right now in the forage market.
Yeah, I guess my other question would be, so we just kind of mentioned the horse market. What I'm starting to find sometimes the goat market, especially the dairy goats. And so we got dairy quality hay, and then you put another like 200 or another 20 relative feed value points onto it, and then you kind of have dairy goat quality hay. And so a lot of that's being pulled out of the West. But just, are you seeing anything with the goat hay, the hay market for dairy goats?
In my area, I don't deal with many dairy goats, I guess, so I'm not sure, but I think that would speak to the point. If you have quality, you have something very valuable.
Yep. Thanks.
We have a question from Jeff. Is the market for higher quality hay still good, or has it also softened due to using the poor hay and adding other co-products to fix the nutrition balance and the ration?
Sure. In my opinion, it's still pretty good. It's not what it was a few years ago when it was dry. That $300 a ton hay doesn't really exist anymore. But you're still, if it's really good hay, you might see 200 a ton, which is a lot better than the 70 or 80 a ton for hay that's 120 feed value compared to the 180 feed value. So I think it's still pretty good. The good hay you can still move. There's people are still kind of trying to gobble that up, like I said. Might not be, if you compare it to like a corn example, it'd be like corn being at $5 instead of 8. Decent, but not great, if that makes sense.
I know last month one of the conversations was the export market, and at that time there was some questions about that. You hearing anything popping on stuff leaving the West Coast?
I have not. I've never exported anything or sent anything to the West Coast, I guess. So I'm not real
I
into.
would I would have to say some of the circles that I hang out in, they have commented that that's still pretty slow, Fred. Everybody's sitting on hay in the West Coast too right now. Just they anybody that's growing hay anywhere right now has kind of got kind of a gripey attitude, I think.
Yep.
You know what my input cost is? Yep, they sure do.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
wanting to save it for
Especially
their input cost.
right.
Exactly. Um, uh, Jim Sulphur's on the program with us. Jim, what question do you have? Kind of put him on the spot. Let me back up and ask Nancy's question. How do you test for the quality of the hay, or do you test at the auction?
Yeah, we do. We probe the bales. We got a probe that goes on a drill. You drill into the bales, it fills a bag. Then we take the bag down to, we use Dairyland Laboratories. It's a laboratory that then tests, gives you the moisture, protein, feed value, and a whole bunch of other things. But those are kind of the big ones guys look at right away. It usually, if they can do the test in a matter of a few hours. It's kind of a pretty quick process. So I guess that's how we do it.
Sarah, Jim?
Yeah, I do have a question. Can you hear me now? I put my
Yep,
headset on.
sure do.
Luke, that's the same thing I see. I'm actually out of St. Cloud, but that's the same thing I'm seeing here is good quality hay is still, that's pretty staying pretty good, actually, maybe up a little bit from a year or so ago. But I do have a question for you smart people. People are thinking about seeding alfalfa. Maybe this is a question for Jeff or somebody else. Is now a good time with all the moisture we've had? What's your recommendation? Should we be planting alfalfa this fall? Trying to get it, I mean, we got plenty of moisture, but it might be getting in mud, or what can we do to do if you need some alfalfa for next year?
If anybody in this call that's in Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, and north of that border, I would say keep it in a bag. And here's why. Moisture's good, yes. But if you only get 35, 40, 45 days maybe on that thing and it hasn't done its contractile growth and is a perennial plant by the time it freezes hard, it was recreational planting. So usually the first week of September, we want to be done with most of that, Mr. Sulphur.
Okay.
And the farther north you go, I mean, they had some pretty good frost 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, northern Minnesota had some frost where my son's
And
at.
and then the next question is, can we do a dormant seeding this fall and hope that it does well next spring? And there's such varying viewpoints on that as well. And my consensus is I try to talk everybody out of it because we go put that seed out there this fall and it lays in the dirt and it's cool and maybe it imbibes some moisture by spring. And then we get February, early March, and we get really warm for a week and it hits 70 degrees. And we could get some things that start to try to germinate. And then we go back to 20 degrees. And again, now we have this patchy, uneven, bad stand that went through an Indian summer in February. So I tell people get it done when it's makes the most sense. And if you want to take chances, just take your $20 bill to the casino because you might lose it both ways.
Okay. We're going to go and ask Dr. Everman. We've got a question from John. He's kind of shifting gears. He doesn't say it's forage soybeans, but he says water hemp and soybeans currently still have green seed heads. At what stage are the seeds viable and will germinate?
So I always have said a rule of thumb on water hemp is once you see that seed head, fully developed, there's viable seed on there somewhere. Usually it'll be a light brown. So pretty much everything on that seed head at this point is probably viable.
Very good. Sarah, my counterpart there in South Dakota has put a new fact sheet and she's got the URL for that. We will also include that in our archive version if people can't get to it on the program here today. Any final closing words, guys? If we don't get questions, we won't keep people.
I want to throw one more thing out there for those guys that are trying to make the most forage they can on those acres. Maybe keep some cover crops out there. If you don't have your rye or triticale or winter annual purchased or ordered yet, just do that. Things don't show up overnight. The retailers appreciate it when you think a little further ahead some days. And that's happening right quickly.
Luke, any suggestions? If I've got my cow herd and it looks like I'm going to be a little short on feed, when should I start looking to lay that in?
I would start right away. I think it's affordable enough. I don't think it's going to go any cheaper, really. I also don't think it's going to gain a lot of traction. I think you might as well start putting in feed soon. I think the most profitable thing to do for a beef guy right now, especially, would be to use that lower quality feed, maybe mix it with a byproduct, something like that, to bring up the quality a little bit. But you could feed a lot of cattle very affordably right now. If you're on the dairy end and you're looking for the better hay, I think that market's going to stay fairly steady. I think I'd put that in now too, because it is a little harder to find than people realize. I think we could get short of the dairy quality hay in my part of the world as we get towards spring.
Jeff put a question in the chat box, and I'm going to throw that out to everybody, including people who are attending. How many areas are getting dry and pastures shutting down at this point?
That makes me kind of nervous that we got complacent on how good the spring was in different parts of the country and kind of kicked back. And so I'm in Northwest Missouri, and I would have given away 10 inches of rain to anybody that wanted to take it through July and August. And now I've got cracks on the ground. You could lose your headset, Fred. So it went from turn it off to oh shit real fast. And so I just wonder how many people maybe are getting a little bit complacent thinking that things are all whipped, and then all of a sudden you go, whoa, that grass, oh well, fall army worms, dry weather, pretty soon you can lose a crop and grazing days pretty quickly. And what's the weather forecast look like? Are we supposed to get a bunch of snow this winter and cover up all those fields so we're going to have to feed hay? Or are we going to be able to graze and be open?
$1 million question there, I believe. Dr. Everman, you gave us a lot of really good information as far as some of the chemistries for different species. Is that available in a PowerPoint, not a Power, a PDF or a publication that we can make sure these listeners can have with the archived version of today's program?
I don't have anything specific right now. I guess I'd point to the state weed control guides, WC 94 for Iowa State. And I'm pretty sure Minnesota, the Dakotas, everybody, I'm pretty sure every surrounding state has their own version. If you want, I can try to pull something and send it to you, to include with the archive.
Very good. Well, at this point, I'm not seeing any questions coming in. I'd like to thank our presenters. It's always an interesting program where we have these quick, almost bullet point presentations, and then have the opportunity to have an excellent question and answer session. Thank my counterpart in South Dakota. The messages you've been getting from her during the programming. Sarah Botter, thank you very much for helping make this program successful, as well as Jim Salfer from Minnesota. Look forward to having you folks back next month. When you get my email, that'll have where it's located at in the archive. It'll also give you the information for next month as well as registration. So thank you all for attending, and I will be shutting it down.